Hi, this is Diane Dieterich of C3D, and today's quick tip is going to be learning some more about textures or materials in SketchUp. So just using the paint bucket tool and applying textures is a pretty basic skill in SketchUp, but to really bring SketchUp to the next level, you need to learn more about manipulating textures, both within SketchUp and in external photo editing software, and also where to find more textures. So we're going to talk all about that today. So clicking the paint bucket tool brings up the materials palette. Usually colors is the default pattern here. And what I'm telling you is a lot is very specific to Windows. If you're using a Mac, please check my YouTube site for a link to a great website that tells you all about using materials with the Mac. So the first drop down is colors, but let's go ahead and pick another drop down. I'm going to go with brick and cladding. I'm going to click this first one and paint our wall with that. So you probably already know about the texture right-clicking editing tools. So position is the one you're going to use most. The red is the stationary button. The green arrow is the one that's going to be useful to you. You can pull it farther away or bring it closer for scaling. You can also, if you didn't know, move these tools. So I can just click on this. I can say I wanted this to be here. I want this to be here. And I can edit from there. This doesn't seem too relevant right now, but if sometimes you're bringing in a texture and one button is here, the second button you're trying to use is way out here, this all can be useful if you're trying to precisely put a material on a surface. For example, if I wanted a corner of this brick to be exactly at the corner of this wall, I can do that by putting the thumbtack on that corner. So any kind of patterns, tile materials that you want to be located specifically at an edge, sometimes that's a good tool. Again, I just clicked, dragged it, and clicked again to place it. And I'm going to hit enter to be done. So that's a quick, just right-click, quickly moving texture tools, but there's more tools in the edit palette. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. So first of all, let's look at the scale down here. We just changed the scale by using the thumbtacks in the texture editing. But you can also change the scale here. And so I'm going to go from 4 feet 10 to, just so it's dramatic, 40 feet. Hit enter, and you can see that that dramatically changes the scale of the texture print, the texture image. Okay, I put the brick back to a more normal size. So some people aren't aware of all the edits that you can do within SketchUp. So I'm going to go to the Edit tab, and underneath the picker there is a color wheel and HLS, hue, lightness, saturation, HSB, and RGB for red, green, blue. So the one I use a lot is hue, lightness, and saturation. You can change the saturation of the color to make it less red, more red, and the same thing, I can change lightness and darkness. So these are quick, easy ways to edit a material. Also, if you know some color theory, and you can go to red, green, and blue, sometimes by adding the opposite color you can desaturate it, you can change the tone of the color. If you go way wrong, there's always a button down here to reset the color and start over again. Okay, so none of that is too complicated, and you've probably maybe figured out some of it already. But here's maybe a really cool trick that you haven't figured out. So here's a brick building that I am working on modeling. Let's see, I'm not really quite there yet. But the most important thing is that this brick and the brick that comes with SketchUp, not even close. So here's a very interesting thing that I can do. I've got the brick selected. I'm going to go to the Edit tab. And there's a couple different options here, and I'm going to pick Match Color on Screen. If I click that, click somewhere on the brightness of the brick that I'm wanting, and it's just selecting a pixel. So be careful about where in this brick you select. But when you click on it, magically this brick suddenly changes tone to match the brick from my image. Now that is cool. So let's look at another example of this that might be more applicable if you're working on interiors. So here's a chair that I found in the SketchUp warehouse, and I have saved a picture of the chair that my clients have chosen, this chair image, which is fairly similar. To find it, I want to make sure that I'm not on file type SketchUp because it won't show up. So always make sure if you're looking for an image that you have JPEG image selected in the drop-down menu. You also want to bring it as an image, so it's almost like a picture. If you brought it in as a texture, it would be something that you have to paint onto something else. And we don't have anything to paint it on, we just want to bring in this image. So I'm going to select it, click open, and if you click on somewhere to get it oriented in the right direction, it'll save you a step of having to rotate it around. I'm going to move it over and scale it up. So now I'm going to use the paint bucket tool. And again, to remember to get down to the texture level in your chair, you got to keep double clicking until that material is highlighted. In the select tool, I'm going to use the paint bucket tool to select that color. And then I'm going to go to the edit tab. And again, I'm going to use match color on screen. I'm going to pick somewhere that the orange seems like a good middle ground. And when I do that, the chair automatically changes color. And then I'm going to click outside to close the component. If it looks a little light or dark from this point, again, you could go back to the Edit tab, maybe make it a little brighter orange. And voila, we suddenly have a matching chair. Another great editing tool is the Opacity Tool. So I'm going to go ahead and just quick punch a window through our wall. And I'm going to go back to the Select tab out of the Edit tab, go to Translucent. And I'm not crazy about any of the window colors that come with SketchUp, because to me they're all too blue, too gray, too something. So I'm going to quick just make a window and push it back, and I'm going to paint the translucent on it. Then what I will do is go to the Edit tab and do two different things. Sometimes I can go to the Hue, Lightness, Saturation and lighten that color up considerably. If you look at the window, you can see how it's changing. And I'm going to reset the color to what it was originally. But what I usually do is change the opacity. So again, that changes the opacity. It makes the blue lighter. And more importantly, if I'm doing a rendering, it's letting more light actually come through that window. Another cool thing I can do sometimes is pick a material that seems, let's go to vegetation. And this is just, so you're like, why would I use that for glass? But if I use that and edit it and get rid of all the green and lighten it up, make it opaque, I can get this tiny little texture in the glass, and I've gotten rid of the color that's associated with it. Or maybe I could make it stained glass, and again it would let some light through. So know that you can use the opacity tool with any material to make some sort of translucent material. Another cool thing you can do is set the material palette up to let you go directly to your photo editing software without closing this, saving the material, starting over again. So I'm going to do that by clicking this little button. When I do that, I've already linked this, and I'll show you how to do this, to my Photoshop. And then from there, I can go ahead and make more precise adjustments that I could do within SketchUp itself. And I know a lot of people are telling me, okay, I don't have Photoshop. And what I teach to use in my classes is Photoshop Elements, which is the kind of consumer version of Photoshop. And probably 95% of what I do, I can do in the Photoshop Elements, and it's about $79 to download that. So to set this up, what you're going to do is going to go to Window, Preferences, and I'm going to click on Applications, and the only thing that comes up is the default image editor. So mine is already here, but to get to it, what you want to do is go to your computer and then go to the Program Files. It's Adobe. I'm going to go to Photoshop, and then in all of these, what you're really looking for in the end is the one that is the Photoshop exe file, and then click OK, and it should automatically link to it in your material palette. Okay, now here's my favorite part. It's called Stuff That Goes Wrong, and it took me forever to figure out what was happening. So here it is, quick answers for you. So sometimes when you bring in a material here, and I'm going to select it and paint it on another surface, and I look at it and it's like, that is not the same material as that, and what the heck is going on? So if you click on this material, right click and go to texture, you'll see that this little check mark by projected is selected, and that's because, I don't know why it does this, because this material and this material are in way different planes or angles of orientation, if you can tell. So I'm going to unclick projected, and suddenly my texture is lovely again. Sometimes that happens, well, it happens often and you don't know what's happening, but usually it's if the two planes are not parallel to each other. So another little thing that can happen, so here's some tile that I found, and I'm going to try to make it into a more bluish tile that I am going to be using. And if I start sliding this, first let's select it, and I'm going to go to the Edit tab. So I'm trying to make it a little more green, but what actually is happening, because of the original colors that were used, now it's this weird green and purple, and that isn't at all what I needed. So here's the magic answer to that. There's a little button here that says Colorize. If I select that, it's going to choose the dominant color, and it's going to get rid of all those weird undertones that sometimes show up. If that isn't working, if anything you try doesn't work, there's always the option to start over and reset the color, and you're back to where you began. So even if you become pretty expert at manipulating SketchUp's inherent textures, there definitely is still a huge limitation with what you can find there. So I'm going to show you a couple other places where you can find additional textures that you can import into SketchUp. So the first one, which is fairly free, is called CG Textures. So it's cgtextures.com. And this has got 50,000 textures, including lots of ones that aren't going to be useful to us because a lot of movie makers, game players use this site. Like, probably don't need a lot of bones. However, there's some really interesting things that you can find here. I'm going to go to Tiles, just to show you how this works. And I'm going to go to this one called Zelig. I'm not sure where that name came from. So you can see, if you look underneath, that some things are set huge, like this would be a pattern for an entire floor. You wouldn't want that to tile. Some are just tiled. This one's tiled huge, which means the pattern will repeat. So if I pick this one, you'll see that it comes in 3 different sizes: small, medium, and large. And usually for what our purposes are, small is fine. In fact, you want to use the smallest image that will work and in your design, because if you start using larger and larger ones, again, they're going to take up a ton of space in your model, and it's really going to slow your model down. So 95% of the time, the small one's going to be fine. The only time where you might want to go to a bigger file is if this is going to be front and center and right in your face in your SketchUp model, which isn't often the case for textures. So also all the small ones are free. You can download 10,000 megabytes or something per day, and the next ones up, you do have to pay a small amount to use those, but for the quality that you get, it's well an investment make. So let's go ahead and click the small one, and I'm going to go ahead and download it. And then let's look to see how to import that into our model. So I saved that tile picture as a JPEG, and you'll remember that the materials that come in your SketchUp material browser are called SKM files, SketchUp material files. So all these textures that we save, we have to deal with in a slightly different way in bringing them into our model. So what you need to do is go to File, Import, and I have over time created a whole filing system of all the different materials that I've used over time. So I've placed that tile that we just found in my tile folder. And if you're not seeing, if you're seeing something like this instead and you want to see the pictures, go to this little drop down menu. I'm going to navigate down to the tile that I found. And I want to make sure that I'm bringing this in as a texture because I want to paint it on something else, not as an image. Also, if you're not seeing the JPEG, remember that you need to have be looking under JPEG in the file type to find it. So I'm going to go to again to my file. I'm going to click Open. It's going to come in attached to my paint bucket tool. I can paint it anywhere on the face, and it's going to fill up the space with that texture. The other source for materials and models that I use quite extensively is a site called FormFonts, formfonts.com. And this is a paid subscription type model. I think it's now $200 a year. But besides images, they have tons and tons of SketchUp models. And because these are all made by paid model makers, you know that they're all good and you can count on them. So I'm going to look at images here, and just so we can compare, I'm going to go to Tile. So the good thing about the images in FormFonts is that these are all tiles that are made exclusively for interior designers, architects. So there's not going to be lots of random stuff which isn't applicable, but if I scroll through these, you can see there's lots of tiles that probably pretty closely represent a material that you are trying to use. So again, it's a paid subscription, but it can save you a lot of time searching for the right thing. So whatever I find, I click on it. Same thing, you download a JPEG and import it just as we did in the last example. So have fun as you learn how to recreate materials, as you learn to manipulate and experiment with the textures that you find to create much more interesting models than those that you can with just the inherent SketchUp materials that come with SketchUp. Have fun, and thanks for stopping by.